You are in the car. The light turns red. You pick up your phone. A notification. Someone died. Someone made a mistake. Someone said something the world decided is unacceptable. You read the first 3 lines. You did not read the full text. You did not check the context, but you already feel something forming, a kind of position. And before the light turns green, you already know what you think, or at least you think you know. The car behind you honks. You put the phone down, but the position is already there, ready, waiting for a conversation to come out in. 3 hours later, you are at lunch. The subject comes up. You speak, with conviction, with the cadence of someone who thought it through. The words come out organized, structured, confident. Someone agrees. Someone disagrees. You defend your position, and at no point, did you pause to ask yourself, do I actually know enough about this to have a position? Because the pause was not available. The pause would have cost too much. This is not opinion, not yet. It is the shadow of opinion. It is the reflection of something you have not yet understood. But you will call it a point of view anyway, because calling it something else, doubt, temporary ignorance, the absence of a position, would be too dangerous. This video is about what you lost when silence became suspicious. It is not just you who feels this pressure. It is a collective compulsion, so deeply internalized that most people can no longer identify the exact moment it began. There is an expectation in the air, invisible but operational, that every informed, engaged, present person in the world must have a position on everything that happens. The death of someone you never knew. The mistake of a company you were never a customer of. The speech of a politician from a country you never visited. The scene of a film you did not watch. The account of an influencer you barely know. The tribunal is always in session, and the absence of a verdict is automatically interpreted as complicity. If you do not condemn, you accept. If you do not speak, you support. If you go silent, you chose a side. And you chose the wrong one. This pressure is not imaginary, it is structural, and it is reshaping the way you think, or rather, the way you stop thinking and start reacting. Think about what happens when a heavy subject erupts on social media. In the first few minutes, the information is fragmented, contradictory, incomplete, but the positions arrive immediately, before the facts, before the context, before any real possibility of understanding. And you observe this, you may even criticize it, but you also participate, because the speed of taking a position has become an indicator of intelligence. Whoever opines first seems more attentive. Whoever opines with more certainty seems more informed. Whoever admits they do not know enough seems, and here is the mechanism, less capable, less present, less worthy of being heard. You were trained to have opinions, not to form them, to have them. Ready, available, performative. Observe how it works in practice. You wake up. Before your coffee, you have already read 12 headlines. Not the articles, the headlines. And you already have an opinion on 12 complex subjects. Economics, geopolitics, human behavior, education, public health. 12 fields that experts spend decades studying. You process them in 40 seconds of scrolling. And you go through your day feeling informed. That is not information. It is the simulation of information. It is the map confused with the territory. And the territory was never visited. And at some point in that process, opinion stopped being the result of thinking. It became the substitute for it. You do not think and then form an opinion. You form an opinion and then construct a narrative that makes it look like you thought it through. The difference between those two sequences is the difference between a human being who thinks and a system that processes social inputs and returns acceptable outputs. The question that no one asks out loud, because asking it would already be suspicious, is this: what if most of your opinions about complex subjects are not really yours? What if what you call a point of view is just the weighted average of the people you follow, the algorithms that feed you, the bubble you inhabit? What if opining so fast, so constantly about everything is not a sign of intelligence, but of capture? Plato answered that 2,400 years ago. And what he answered will redraw what you think you are doing when you open your mouth. Plato was born in Athens around 428 before Christ. He grew up in a democracy, but he did not believe in it, at least not in democracy without filters, without criteria, without epistemic hierarchy. He watched his mentor, Socrates, the man he considered the wisest in Athens, precisely because he knew that he knew nothing, be sentenced to death by popular vote. condemned by collective opinion, not by truth. 501 citizens voted for the death of Socrates, not because he had done something empirically wrong, but because he was unsettling, because he asked questions that exposed the shallowness of other people's certainties, because he transformed "I know" into "Are you sure you know?" And that is the most politically dangerous move that exists in any era. That trauma shaped all of Plato's philosophy and tormented him for decades. Plato spent decades trying to understand why human beings confuse shadow with reality, appearance with truth, opinion with knowledge. And what he built, the distinction between doxa and episteme, is today more relevant than when it was written. Doxa is opinion. Episteme is knowledge. For Plato, these are not merely different words. They are radically different cognitive states. Doxa is what you have when you have seen the shadows on the wall and believe you have seen the world. Episteme is what you have when you have left the cave and looked directly at the sun, a slow, painful process that demands the abandonment of comfortable certainties. And confusing one with the other is not merely an intellectual error. It is an existential condition, a way of inhabiting the world that keeps you a prisoner of shadows while you believe you are seeing the light. Have you ever entered an online discussion about a subject you knew well, medicine, law, history, your own professional field, and watched people opine with complete conviction about something they clearly understood in a superficial or mistaken way? You felt that specific mixture of frustration and fascination. Because their certainty was genuine, they were not pretending to know, they believed they knew. The speed with which they reached their conclusion was so high that they completely skipped the questioning stage. Now, reverse the experiment. In how many areas are you that person? In how many subjects do you have their certainty, speed of verdict, apparent solidity of position? But if pressed, if unpacked, if asked about the foundations, the data, the alternative perspectives, you would hit a hollow? This is not an accusation. It is a precise description of the environment. The modern environment does not reward those who think slowly. It rewards those who respond quickly. It does not reward those who say, "I don't know enough." It rewards those who say, "I know," with conviction, with fluency, with the right cadence of someone who is confident. There is a technical name for this phenomenon, the illusion of explanatory depth. Researchers at Yale demonstrated that people consistently overestimate how much they understand about complex systems, from how a faucet works to how an economic policy operates. When forced to explain in detail, the certainty collapses, the hollow appears. But without the pressure to explain, the certainty remains intact. And on social media, no one asks you to explain in detail. They ask you to take a position in 3 seconds. And so, through environmental pressure, we learn to simulate the cognitive state of someone who knows, even when we are in the state of someone who is still discovering. We learn to put on the mask of certainty before reaching the substance of it. This has a name. Plato called it doxa. Today we call it participation. Silence has a cost, not a financial one, a social one. Every time you fail to opine on a subject where others expected your verdict, you pay with an invisible fraction of credibility. Every "I don't know enough to have a position on this" is interpreted as evasion or weakness. The environment does not merely allow instant opinion, it made it mandatory. And in doing so, it created an economy where certainty is the currency and doubt is poverty. Plato saw that economy in Athens. He called it the tyranny of the majority over truth. You live in it. And you pay the tax every day you open your apps. You go to a dinner. Someone brings up a complex topic. The global economy, geopolitics, quantum theory, anything of high cognitive density. The table weighs in. Each person constructs a sentence that sounds like analysis. It has the cadence of an argument. It has the structure of reasoning. But if you pull on any of the threads, where does that data come from? What did you mean by that? The structure begins to collapse. Not because the people are unintelligent, because they were displaying thought, not thinking. Plato called this empty rhetoric, the form without the content, the appearing without the being. Today we call it engagement. The shift is that the spectacle of the intellect is so convincing, for others and for ourselves, that it begins to replace actual intellect. Think about the last 5 strong opinions you expressed about a current topic. Now trace them. Where did each one come from? Did you arrive at those conclusions through your own reasoning, or did they arrive to you already formed, through the algorithm, through the bubble, through the accounts you follow, through the podcast you listen to? Do the exercise slowly. Trace the genealogy of each idea. In most cases, you will find an external source, a post that impacted you, a conversation that shaped your frame, a piece of content that introduced you to the subject with a specific angle. Most people, when they do this exercise honestly, discover that their opinions are downloads, not productions. You did not form the point of view. You received the point of view and adopted it as your own, with small stylistic variations that create the illusion of authorship. Plato described the cave exactly this way. The prisoners look at shadows projected on the wall and believe the shadows are reality. The difference is that Plato's prisoners had no choice. You do, but you rarely use it. What happens to a person who spends years in this state? Opining more than understanding, positioning more than thinking, reacting more than reflecting? They lose their core, not dramatically, not in a visible collapse. They lose their core incrementally, the way you lose muscle mass when you stop exercising, without noticing over time, until one day you try to carry something and discover that the strength you thought you had is no longer there. The core here is the capacity to sustain uncertainty, to inhabit the I don't know without anxiety, to say, I need to think more about this without feeling diminished, to exist in a state of cognitive openness without needing to convert it immediately into a position. That capacity, which the Greeks called aporia, the fertile state of genuine questioning, is the raw material of real thought. Socrates built his entire philosophy on aporia. He entered dialogue not to impose conclusions, but to dismantle false certainties, to reveal that where people thought they knew, they actually only believed they knew. But aporia is uncomfortable. It demands tolerance for ambiguity. It demands an ego strong enough to admit the temporary emptiness of not knowing. And the modern environment did everything possible to make that discomfort unbearable. Every second of silence in a discussion is read as incapacity. Every admission of ignorance is recoded as weakness. Every request for time to think is interpreted as evasion. Picture the scene: a group of friends discussing politics. One of them says, "Honestly, I don't know enough about this topic to have a solid position." Silence. Looks. The sentence should be praised. It is the most epistemically honest response possible, but it is not. It is received with discomfort, as if that person had revealed a character flaw, as if not knowing were a confession. And in the next round, that person opines, even without knowing, because the cost of not opining was too high to pay twice. And so, through accumulated pressure, highly intelligent people, capable of genuine thought, abandoned aporia, the state of intellectual fertility, and adopted permanent doxa, the state of continuous automatic opinion, simply to survive socially. The result? Identities built entirely from the outside in. Beings who no longer know where the algorithm's opinions end and their own begin. People who, if silenced for 30 days, no social media, no news, no conversations about what is happening, would not know what they think about anything relevant in the world, because they never had to find out. The environment always provided the answers before they needed to formulate the questions. Here is the complete mechanism. Now you can see it. The problem is not that people have opinions. Opinion is human. It is the starting point of thought, not the destination. The problem is that social hypervisibility, the permanent existence in digital display windows, where every silence is visible and every position is recorded, transformed opinion into a substitute for identity. Before, you were what you did, what you built, what you created, what you maintained with consistency over time. Now, you are the sum of your reactions. You are what you agree with, what you condemn, what you share, what you pass along with a 3-word comment that works as a signature of who you are. Think about how you would describe someone you know well. You would probably use opinions. He is against this. She stands for that. He thinks so-and-so is X. She posts about Y. Opinions have become the vocabulary of identity, not character, not actions, not history. Public positions. The sequence of verdicts issued over time that build an image of who the person is. And when identity becomes the sum of external reactions, when the self is constructed from the outside in, like a mosaic of positions on events you barely controlled, the stable core of the self disintegrates. You do not have an identity that produces opinions. You have opinions that produce the illusion of an identity. Plato called this state of confusion between doxa and episteme the condition of the prisoner in the cave. Inhabiting the shadow, and believing the shadow is the world. The invisible mechanism operating here has a name: spectacularization of the intellect. The appearance of knowing must obligatorily precede the act of understanding. The display of the position replaces the process of forming it, and the system, the attention economy, the algorithm, the culture of digital presence, does not merely allow this inversion. It incentivizes it, it monetizes it, it transforms it into a metric of social relevance. The fault is not individual, it is structural. You are not weak for having fallen into this dynamic. You are operating exactly as the environment was designed to make you operate. What is disturbing is not you. It is the system that captured you without needing to warn you. Now you can see what was hidden. The pressure to opine about everything is not a spontaneous cultural phenomenon. It is the logical consequence of an environment that monetizes engagement and where engagement is measured by reaction. Every position taken is a data point. Every data point feeds a system. Every system needs more data to function. And so, by design, silence became dysfunctional, not for you, but for the attention economy that depends on your continuous participation. What you lost in that process is not the quality of debate, though you lost that too. What you lost was more fundamental: the right to not know. The only intellectually honest position in the face of complex phenomena is, most of the time, that of someone who is still trying to understand. But that position was made socially unacceptable. It was recoded as ignorance, as passivity, as complicity. And so, to avoid paying the social cost of silence, you started opining, always, about everything, with the certainty the environment demands, even when what you actually feel in the quiet place inside you is doubt. Doxa instead of episteme, shadow instead of light, a prisoner who confuses the chains with freedom. Plato was not describing the Athens of 2,400 years ago. He was describing you, today, right now. What changes when you see this? Not your routine, not your habits of consuming information, not the number of times you open the app. What changes is the level at which you understand yourself. You begin to notice the difference between the moment when you are genuinely thinking about something and the moment when you are merely executing a position the environment expects of you. They are distinct sensations, but you needed to be alerted to them before you could separate them. You begin to notice with growing strangeness how many of your opinions arrived already formed. How much of what you defend with vigor is, in fact, a product of the echo chamber you inhabit. And how much, if you had inhabited a different chamber, the opinions would be completely different with the same conviction. That is the most disturbing thing of all. It is not that you have the wrong opinions. It is that you would have completely opposite opinions, with the same certainty, with the same intensity, with the same sense that it is obvious, if the algorithm had fed you differently from the beginning. Conviction is not evidence of truth. It is evidence of repeated exposure. You begin to question something you never questioned before. Authorship. Are these ideas yours? Did you arrive at them? Or did they arrive to you, and you simply adopted them with the speed the environment rewards? And in that moment, when the question of the authorship of your own opinions settles in, you experience something that most people in the modern world rarely experience: genuine aporia, the fertile state of not knowing, the crack through which real wisdom could enter if you allowed it. It is not comfortable. Socrates was killed for inducing people into that state. The environment was designed to make you flee from it, but it is the only position from which real thinking can begin. Everything before that is noise with the structure of an argument. There is a question the system does not want you to ask, not because it is dangerous for others, but because it is destabilizing to the way you function within it. The question is simple. Of the opinions you expressed with conviction over the last 30 days, about politics, about people, about events, about behaviors, about everything you felt was too obvious not to have a position on, how many did you form? And how many were formed by the environment before you had time to notice? That is not a rhetorical question. It is a real question with a real answer that most people never sit down to calculate honestly, because the answer is uncomfortable. Because the answer suggests that a large part of what we call intellectual identity, our values expressed in positions, our presence in debate, the ongoing construction of who we are in the public space, is, in a frightening proportion, a reflection of the environment, a shadow projected on the cave wall that we learned to call by our own name. Socrates spent his life asking exactly that question, not about politics or events, about the intimate certainties of each person. You say you are just. What is justice? And every time, invariably, the certainty collapsed. Not because people were ignorant, but because they had confused familiarity with knowledge. They lived so closely with the concept that they believed they understood it, without ever having truly examined it. The same operation, the same cave, 2,400 years later, with Wi-Fi. Plato does not offer a way out. He only offers vision, the capacity to see the cave as a cave, not as the world. And that vision does not come with relief. It comes with a specific kind of discomfort that has no easy name in everyday language. The discomfort of knowing that you were confusing the map with the territory, the reaction with the thought, the shadow with the light. And now you can no longer unsee it. The question that remains is not what to do with this. The question is, now that you have seen the mechanism, now that you know how opinion was converted into a substitute for identity, how the appearance of knowing became more urgent than understanding, how silence was made suspicious by design, can you keep operating as if you had not seen it? That is the question Plato posed to Athens. Athens answered by executing Socrates. Will you answer differently? Plato did not offer a solution, and Antidote will not offer one either. Because lucidity is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition to be inhabited. What you do with it, if you do anything at all, is a question only you can answer. And for that, you will need something the modern environment is systematically destroying. Time without positioning, space without verdict. The courage to not know, and to remain in the not knowing for as long as it takes for something real to emerge. If this diagnosis made sense, if you recognize the mechanism operating in your own life, subscribe to the channel, not because you will find answers here, but because you will find more questions that the system does not want you to ask. Antidote: Philosophy without anesthesia.